Did I trick you? Does it look like a real bowl of soup? I am doing this wrong. For sure. But maybe it will work anyway. Hi, welcome to Moonbelly Makes. My name is Katrina and welcome to my kitchen. Today you are joining for the third installment of my newest series. Well, all my series are new, but the series that is lovingly called Katrina's Great British Baking Project, or Bake Along with Bake Off, where I recreate the bakes that the contestants make on the Great British Bake Off, which is one of my favorite shows. Go watch it if you haven't, it's so good. And I've finally made it to the showstopper. I already made the signature, which was a caramel apple cake called a bonfire apple cake, if you want to go check that out. And then I made the technical, which were mini chocolate rolls with a peppermint filling, yum. And for the showstopper, the contestants had to make illusion cakes, so they had to look like something that they are not. And obviously I made a cake that is trying to at least look like a bowl of ramen. I know it's not totally an illusion. Like, I don't think that this would fool anyone for more than a split-second glance, and that's okay. That's fine. I tried a whole bunch of new techniques that I've never done before, and the fact that it looks as good as it does, I'm happy with. I'm content. I'm beyond content, actually. So this is Yan's banana ramen cake, which is much better in a British accent than in my Midwest American accent. What I did for this was a banana cake with a buttercream frosting. The chicken katsu is made out of Rice Krispie treats. All of the other toppings and the outside of the bowl are made out of marshmallow fondant that I made from scratch. And there's a little salmon roe on there, which is actually made out of mango juice. So I copied everything as best I could the way that Yan makes it on the show, and I think it came out really good, but see for yourself. I've been collecting a literal armful of bananas in my freezer for banana breads and muffins that have not yet come to be, so this cake felt like a perfect use for them. As per usual, I started with the cake itself. Before picking out a few of the many bananas available to me, I estimated the size of the cake I would want in the end using this bowl, and determined that one recipe's worth of the batter would be enough. Then I got my bananas thawing under some cool water while I turned my attention to the dry ingredients. The recipe called for flour, baking powder, baking soda, salt, and cinnamon, but I added some cardamom too because I love cardamom and it goes really well with bananas. I gave the dries a good whisk and rescued my bananas. Thawed bananas are really gross, but I got them all into a bowl and drained off some of the excess liquid. Then it was time to welcome Art Vandelay, my stand mixer, to the stage and get going on the wet ingredients. I mashed up the bananas first and then put them to the side while I creamed softened butter together with both white and light brown sugars. Scrapey scrape, mixy mix for a few minutes, and then once it was all super fluffy, in went eggs and vanilla. Scrapey scrape again, mixy mix, and then the bananas went in. I let it go for a few minutes on medium, and when I stopped, I noticed it was super lumpy. Hello, welcome to the first problem of the day. I think my bananas were too cold, and now the butter is kind of clumping up. I don't think it's supposed to look like this at this stage. They weren't still frozen, but I guess they were just too cold, and I should have known better. But it's okay, I didn't. So I'm just gonna let it sit and hopefully it will come up to a better temperature and then the butter will smooth out. I might even just put it on the oven for a couple minutes because the oven is hot and might bring it to a better temperature a little bit quicker. Oops. Okay, let's look at this batter. It smells good. Okay, it's better if it's still not there. I'm gonna put it back on the stove. And I'm actually gonna stir it a little bit while it's on the stove because the center is just still so cold that when I put it back in the mixer, it just makes everything cold again. So I'm just gonna give it a couple stirs over there on the stove and hopefully, I mean, it's working, it's getting better. There's just still butter like suspended in the banana goo. Banana goo. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's much better, and I am going to forge ahead. In this case, forging ahead meant adding the dry ingredients and the buttermilk in alternating additions. And yes, the buttermilk was room temperature. That one I had made sure of ahead of time. It's looking like cake batter. I think it's gonna be okay. The batter was actually so gorgeous, just silky and luxurious. It went into my prepared lasagna dish that was lined with greased parchment paper, and then into the oven. Okay, now that the cake is in the oven, it's time to decide what to do next. Well, first I'm gonna tidy up a little bit because I made a bit of a mess. But I think I'm gonna work on the chicken katsu because I think that that is within my wheelhouse, and I'm gonna start easy. Here it goes. While the cake was baking, I was very excited to get to try out the new gel food coloring set that I had recently gotten, which came with gloves. It's just very adorable. How thoughtful. I have to use color theory here. I'm not good at color theory. If I mix brown and orange, do you think I'll get the color of the outside of fried chicken? After getting some help brainstorming from Josh, I decided to try the orange red and the brown mixed together. So I made an 8th recipe of Rice Krispie treats. I knew I would separate out about half of the Rice Krispie mixture that I would leave uncolored. That would be the center, or the chicken meat on the inside of the chicken katsu. But I wanted the outside to be that brownish color of fried breading, mixing in food coloring just to the 1/2. And yeah, it did not work. As it started to cool, it started getting too hard to mix, so I put it back into the pan to warm it up. But even then, if anything, it looked like raw chicken. Take 2 worked so much better. This time I mixed the coloring in while everything was still in the pan and still hot, instead of after the cereal was added. And I used yellow and brown to get that perfect fried katsu look. It was spot on. The one that didn't work? I mean, it's a Rice Krispie treat. It tastes amazing. Next, I decided to tackle the mango caviar. The first step of this actually happened the night before when I thawed some frozen mango overnight in the fridge. The next step was to put some vegetable oil in a thin jar in the fridge so it could get really cold. Then I blended the thawed mango with a little bit of water to make mango puree. Spherification, or making fruit caviar, starts by taking fruit juice or puree and boiling it for just a few minutes with agar-agar, which is new to me and is a plant-based gelatin powder. So after getting acquainted with the agar-agar, really fine. It smells kind of like a natural swimming pool, like a salt swimming pool. My gym used to have one of those. I hope my oil is cold enough to start this process, but let's just say that it is. I started warming up the mango puree and added the powder before giving it a good whisking. I then let it bubble for a little bit while also continuing to whisk well. Then I used a clean and new pipette to drip the warm mango puree into the cold oil. The first ones worked so well. Holy shit. When the warm juice hits the cold oil, it forms perfect little mango spheres. Then they can be rinsed off with cool water, and you have what looks like caviar but tastes like mango, or cherry juice, or etc., etc. I recently saw someone do this with vermouth, so I think the possibilities really extend beyond just fruit flavors. Anyway, let's please take a moment for the spheres. So yeah, remember when I said the oil might not be cold enough? Yeah, it really wasn't. No. It looked like everything was going okay, but a little stir of the pipette revealed that the temperature of the oil was raised too much by the end of dropping hot puree by the pipette full. And a lot of what had started as spheres actually turned into a big lump. Thankfully, after I rinsed everything, I saw that I had plenty that did work, that did maintain their shape. Well, that's fun. I'm gonna do that again. What a fun trick. It was not great, but it was not bad. I got about half of the amount that I piped in. I think the oil just got a little too warm and the spheres weren't able to fully form, so they just kind of glommed together, but that's fine. I have more than enough for my little cake that I'm making. I turned the cake out. It is now cooling on a rack, and while that cools, I think I'm going to tackle the fondant. My dilemma right now is how much I'm gonna make, but I think I'm just gonna make one recipe, which makes an entire pound. That should be enough, and I'll just, oh, hi, say hello. So, where was I? So I think I'm just gonna make one recipe. It's just gonna be enough. Maybe I'll set aside just like a third of it, and that will be my, what I'll actually use to cover the cake and make like the bowl. And then I'll use the other 2/3 for making the toppings. Sound good?
Fondant starts with a lot of marshmallows and a little bit of water
I don't even like marshmallows.
that are microwaved until melted and mixed with a lot of powdered sugar until it looks and feels like Play-Doh. Note to self, use a bigger bowl next time. I actually gave up on the bowl pretty quickly and transferred to kneading, which I did the exact same way I would knead bread dough, except there was powdered sugar on my countertop, not flour. After about 6 minutes of arm workout, it was smooth and dense and ready to be used. I split it into sections, imagining how big I wanted each future item. I set aside one half to be the outside of the bowl and used the other half to be all of the toppings.
Carrot and bok choy, egg yolk, yellow, fruit, green for bok choy, and the carrot leaf, scallion, for the fish cake, orange, and carrot.
After picking the colors, I donned gloves one more time and kneaded the colors into the fondant. It was tricky because the fondant didn't want to absorb the color very well, and I got a lot of it just on my gloves. Luckily, the gloves rinsed off really easily, so I didn't have to change them for every color. After I made my colored Play-Doh, the fondant, I got to the fun part of shaping. I made the scallions by rolling light green around white and then slicing them like actual scallions. They got smushed into pillow shapes by the knife as I sliced, so I rounded them back with my hands. Then I made green leaves for the baby bok choy and put them onto a white base. Then I took pink and white that I had rolled together into a spiral log and sliced them thin with a piece of sewing thread to make the fish cake slices. Then I shaped the egg white, popped in the yolk, and gave it a slice. It also got a little lumpy from slicing, but it was very easy to mold back into proper egg shape. For the noodles, I ran some uncolored fondant through Art Vandel's pasta cutter attachment. I was so impressed. The fondant really looked like
Noodles! Okay, I think that's all I'm gonna do for today. I made a ton of progress and everything's ready for me to basically just assemble everything tomorrow. So I'm just gonna get everything wrapped up and pop it in the fridge, and I will see you tomorrow. Good morning. I'm very excited to finally put this cake together. It's actually not tomorrow, it's the next day. I also know that I really like an aged cake, like a cake that's been resting for a day or two in the fridge, so I'm not mad that it's taken me an extra day to do this. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make frosting, and then I'm gonna carve the cake, roll out the fondant, put it all together, and eat it. Except probably not eat the fondant, because I don't like marshmallows that much. Or food coloring. Okay.
The hardest part about this frosting was remembering to take the butter and cream cheese out of the fridge with enough time to come to room temperature. That is to say, it's really easy to make this frosting. The butter was in this green bowl because I had browned it 2 days prior while the cake was in the oven. My go-to easy buttercream is an American buttercream frosting that I call BBCC, brown butter and cream cheese. So I wanted to make that for this cake. I started by whipping up both of the dairy fat products until fluffy, that is, butter and cream cheese. and then added powdered sugar, vanilla, and a little bit of salt. I let art go for a while so that the frosting became super smooth. Cake carving time! There's a first time for everything, and this was my very first time carving a cake into any sort of shape. I used 2 bowls to measure the approximate size for each of the 2 layers, and gently scored the cake to make cutting lines. Because the cake was super chilled from being in the fridge for a nice long time, it was really firm and easy to cut without tearing. I removed the excess, which went into the freezer to make cake truffles out of in the future, and was left with 2 not so perfect rounds of cake. I stacked the smaller one on the larger one, so it was as if the bowl of ramen was upside down, and started carving away more of the cake so that the sides were angled, just like a bowl. I know it's not perfect, but I think for my first time ever doing anything like this, it turned out pretty okay. I put a generous layer of frosting in between the 2 cake rounds and put her little hat on. Then I did a crumb coat before putting the whole thing back in the fridge. A crumb coat is a thin layer of frosting that you can put on and then chill really well so that it hardens a bit. And it will seal the outside of the cake so that when you go to do the actual frosting, bits of cake don't crumble into the frosting and mess up the look. I did not have to do this because the cake will be covered in fondant anyway, but I wanted to practice. I don't have a lot of experience with this. I flipped her over onto the serving plate and continued the crumb coat all the way over the top and placed the whole thing
into the fridge.
With the cake in the fridge, I decided to roll out the other half of fondant that had been snuggled up in its plastic wrap blanket and was patiently waiting for this moment. I again used powdered sugar to provide a non-stick surface for rolling out. I think even though I wrapped it super tightly in a few layers of plastic wrap, it still got a little bit dried out and was not at all wanting to roll out thinly. I used my forearms on the rolling pin so I could really use my weight, and it really took a long time, but it finally got nice and thin. I cut it into 2 rectangles, the width that matched the height of the cake, and made a little food coloring paint just out of some of the blue food coloring and water to paint some stripes onto the bowl. While the food coloring paint dried, I frosted the cake with a thicker and therefore more delicious layer of frosting, and then put it back in the fridge. I got all of my toppings out, the Rice Krispie Katsu, which I sliced, the mango caviar, which I drained, and the plate full of fondant, which I unwrapped. I had sent a picture of the plate of toppings to my family, and my dad said the scallions looked like peas, and he was not wrong, so I decided to slice them thinner. I used a little water to glue together the 2 strips of fondant for the outside of the bowl, and wrapped the double strip around the cake. Because the cake had an angle to it and the fondant did not, I took little tucks around the bottom to help it lay smooth. This was pretty sloppy, I know, but I don't have one of those fondant smoother thingies. I don't even know what they're called. And I also think my fondant was too thin and too brittle for that to work anyway. This part was the most fun. I laid out all of the toppings very similarly to how Yan laid out hers, and it was super satisfying and gratifying to have all of the hard work come together, and it did end up looking pretty good.
I'm pretty pleased. It could be so much better, but that's not the point. I'm very pleased with myself. What? Focus on me. Could it be better? Of course. I've never done anything like this before, and I learned a ton about what I can do better next time. But I think the concept, definitely a 10 out of 10. It's so cute. Here's the thing I didn't really think about until I started putting the toppings on. When you have a bowl of soup, the toppings aren't above the edge of the bowl. They're inside the bowl. So I could have carved the cake out a little bit and made more of a bowl, or made better fondant that actually came up around the outside, which is what it looks like Yan did in the original cake. Oh, I also forgot. This is very important. Choppers. Chopsticks. That really makes it, doesn't it?
It was time to slice into this bubba, and I clearly had a hard time with it. If you watch Bake Off, you know that Paul just ruthlessly cuts into the baker's creations. So I tried to channel him a little bit and did my best to shut off my emotional connection to all the work I had done. And finally, I made the first cut. The cake was pretty dense, maybe a little bit underbaked, but nonetheless, I took my chopsticks and my favorite ramen spoon. Oh, don't forget the toppings. Gotta get a little noodle, some scallions. And I gave it a try. The cake, delicious. Such a good, sweet banana flavor. The frosting complemented it well. Fabulous. The fondant, on the other hand, thanks, but no thanks. Ooh. I tasted the Rice Krispie katsu next, and tastes like chicken. Just kidding.
Okay, that's it. That was really good. If nothing else, I highly recommend making this banana cake recipe. I'm also really happy that with that cream cheese frosting, it really kind of balanced things out a little bit more than the other two bakes that I've made so far that were just like sweet on sweet on sweet, just to have a little bit of the tanginess from the cream cheese and also the nuttiness from the brown butter really balances out the sweetness of the banana. It's just a really good cake. So like I said before, I think that the concept is definitely 10 out of 10. It is absolutely adorable. I think all of the toppings that Ian chose were just absolutely perfect and really fun to practice with and really fun to recreate. Execution wise, I'll give myself an 8 out of 10. I don't think that I did too bad, but there's a lot of learning that I could do. Flavor wise, it's spot on. It's so good. I think that my fondant work could definitely use some improvement. I think that my use of food coloring could also use some improvement. I think I was worried about things being too pigmented and then things got maybe a little bit lighter than they could or should have been. I think I could have really gone for it with the food coloring. I also think that I made udon noodles and not ramen noodles. Looking back at the pictures from the show, Yan's noodles were a little bit yellower. I didn't add any coloring to mine, so mine were just like totally white. And then also I ran mine through like the fettuccine cutter, so they're a little bit thicker than a traditional ramen noodle, which would be thinner. I should have ran it through the spaghetti cutter. Was I thinking? I don't know. I'm like, what was I thinking? Maybe I just wasn't thinking. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining on this banana ramen journey, and I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that maybe you learned a little bit from my mistakes and that maybe you're inspired to play around a little bit in the kitchen, because it is really fun. For all of the full details, for all of the information about which recipes I used, a little bit more in depth about how things went, you can head to the post on my website. And also on my website, I have a whole bunch of other stuff that has nothing to do with Great British Bake Off. There's recipes of my own and also a bunch of crafting stuff, like totally different world, but a bunch of crafting DIY projects. So if you're interested in that, please go check it out. I would love that. And you can also find me on Instagram to stay connected and see a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. I'm gonna start sharing that kind of stuff on Instagram. That's it, I think. Thanks for watching. Bye. Oh my God.